I want to tell you about this article I read in Aeon about how losing our elders could in some ways be worse than losing those young around us, which is a really counterintuitive concept, isn't it? I mean, we always tend to think that it's losing the young that is the greatest tragedy. That's a very Western way of thinking of it. We think that when someone is young, they have their whole life ahead of them, so it's like they've been robbed if they die too soon. Whereas on the contrary, when we hear about an adult who has died, like, someone who's slightly aged, someone's parents or grandparents, or, maybe you have a 50-year-old friend who told you they just lost someone, the first question that comes to you, and you might even ask them, is, well, how old was he or she? And the age changes for some of us. For some of us it's 80, sometimes it's over 85, but there is some kind of age threshold at which point you'll go like, well, you'll shrug and say, well, that's not too bad. They lived, You might not say it, but you'll feel it. You'll feel that, well, they've had their life. It's bad, of course, but there's worse. So this idea that losing our elders might in some ways be worse than losing the young doesn't feel right to us. But here's the thing. When we lose someone we love, whether it's a child or our parents or a very close friend, we're not just losing a person, we're losing a whole language. It's a language that we have in common with that person and that no one else is a party to. It's like a whole worldview. It's like a running joke that you share with one person alone. Think of how twins develop their own language that nobody else speaks or understands. Or how, with your best friend you'll have these in-jokes that no one else gets. When you lose someone, you lose all that, a whole language. And the language is a worldview. It's a way of looking and thinking about the world that only one other person understands, the person you've just lost. So, within this framework, when you lose an elder, it's kind of like losing a native tongue. A language through which you learn the world, because so many of us were taught the world by our elders. So in a very real way, when you lose an elder, you lose the world as you first found it, when you made those first steps in it. Maybe this is what Confucius, the ancient Chinese philosopher, is talking about when he says that mourning for our parents requires us to give of ourselves utterly. This is a very ancient concept in Chinese philosophy from Confucius. The fact that the death of our elders, which is one of the most common tragedies that we experience, most of us experience it, is in fact one of the most disturbingly intense experiences, which is clearly the opposite of what we believe in Western philosophy. So it's a peculiar attitude that the Chinese have about this, or at least Confucians. So why is this the case for Confucius? Confucius's idea suggests that when we think of the death of an elderly, we in the West that is, we think that it's fine because it came at the right time, and because of that, our grief may somehow be mitigated. But the thing is, Confucius says that grief is never much about death, it's about loss. And the loss of our elders is unlike any other loss. Because we come to understand ourselves through other people. Our identities, who we are, is forged by our relationships with other people. We view ourselves through them. And in this sense, our relationships to our parents and our grandparents is so different because their language is the first language we speak. The world we first see is the world that they show us through how they talk and how they behave. They map our world. They show us how to be humans. They are the first people to do that. Imagine that loss. This is a quote from the article. In a recurrent image in Confucian philosophy, elders root us biologically but also morally and existentially. We flower in understanding and caring and purpose because we draw deeply on what they have made and offered. When we are nurtured well, we incur a debt we cannot discharge. Living well is proper payment for their tuition, but its full measure resides in a future they will not share, when we become the elder to others. While we wish the aged to pass before the young, we dread the fact their passing will oblige us to find our own authority, and the day must come when the only seasoned wisdom we can find will be our own.